As you look back on your career in psychiatry, are there any other moments that you would like to note that you're particularly
Yeah.
proud of?
Well, I think, in retrospectively, the change in homosexuality uh, was the high point. Um, but there were other things. For example, uh, this was a time of Watergate and all the furor over Nixon. And this was the time when Nixon's plumbers broke into the office of Dr. Fielding, a psychoanalyst who was the psychoanalyst for Ellsberg, who had revealed or given the Pentagon Papers to the newspapers. And we were very distressed, outraged by this breach of confidentiality. And under the leadership of the APA, we organized a national council on the confidentiality of medical records. And it was abroad, all the leading medical organizations, the surgeons, AMA, and others joined in, and I was privileged to be the first president, or the president all the way through the organization. I felt that was very important. Another event in my presidency was I led a group to the Soviet Union at the regional meeting of the World Psychiatric Association.
Mm-hmm.
And it was held in Yerevan in Soviet Armenia and Tbilisi, Soviet Georgia. And before the meeting, I wrote to the president of the All Unions Psychiatric Association, Professor Shnevsky, and said that we wish to raise the question of psychiatric abuse, which was a very big issue at that time. And we also wanted to interview detainees in psychiatric hospitals, political individuals who had been inappropriately hospitalized. And after saying that we wouldn't come unless we had that assurance, so they gave us that assurance. And it was that's a whole long story of our adventures in this. But when we finally came to the end, they said they would have a meeting in the Serbsky Institute, which was the psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane. And unfortunately, or to our regret, they just presented cases without any opportunity to interview. And there were obviously cases of long-standing schizophrenia who had nothing to do with political dissidents. So that was a failure. But it marked the beginning of a very active phase of the APA that continued for years in opposing the abuse of psychiatry and the abuse of psychiatrists in the Soviet Union that I think was contributed, at least in part, to the eventual changes that took place.
I know that your interest in this subject has continued and that you continue to speak out about modern issues, including the interrogation of prisoners and the role of psychiatrists in executions.
Right.
And I wonder if you want to mention anything about that. These were issues that modern psychiatry and our assembly of the American Psychiatric Association
I
continues to debate.
I think that was a very important issue, and many of us were involved in it. As a past president, I'm a member of the board in perpetuity, and I was one among many who took a very strong stand against psychiatrists participating in the interrogation of detainees, particularly in Guantanamo, but also Abu Ghraib and other places where psychologists and psychiatrists had been involved. The board, as you recall, passed a resolution that unequivocally stated psychiatrists should not participate in the interrogation of detainees.
As did the Assembly.
No, I mean to correct you, that the Assembly changed the wording.
That's true.
And changed the wording that many of us felt really vitiated the strength of the, because it said, as I recall, in crucial episodes, and sort of left the loophole so that in certain circumstances. And we had a big debate in the board, and I must say the president, Steve Sharpstein at that time, and Paul Applebaum took a strong stand, which I had been sending email after email to them. And so the board passed its original statement rejecting the changes that the Assembly had made. And then the resolution was sent again to the Assembly. And I guess it was in the Toronto meeting.
Right. And
the Assembly approved.
The Assembly ultimately approved it, yes.
Actually, they approved by, again, sort of a 2-to-1 vote.
Right.
And because I think it had been pushed through by a couple of forensic psychiatrists who probably felt threatened that by this.
I think
and the Assembly, I don't think, was aware of that. But when they did, when this came, I remember that Paul Applebaum and Steve Sharpstein appeared before the Assembly.
That's true. The first time, I think the Assembly was somewhat sympathetic to the dilemma of the military psychiatrists who felt that they could represent the patient's mental problems by somehow being there. But ultimately, as the whole issue was further considered with Dr. Applebaum and Sharfstein's opinions on it, ultimately did pass the same resolution that the board, and it did become the policy of the American Psychiatric Association. Well, what do you see in the future? What kind of issues do you think American psychiatry is going to be dealing with in the future?